Look, so far the signs are showing that every time an explosion or an operation that has been attributed to Israel has been, in terms of operational wise and tactical wise, it's been, as according to foreign newspaper sources, a phenomenal success. But in the current ongoing struggle with Iran, you can't think tactically. You have to think strategically. You have to think the big picture. Let's just assume for a moment that Israel was behind all these attacks. Has it fulfilled and has it achieved our strategic goal of slowing down Iran's nuclear program or even stopping it? Forget about stopping it, just slowing it down. All the signs show that no, it hasn't. And this is what the Americans are saying. It's one thing to smuggle documents out of Tehran, as the Mossad did, and it greatly contributed to our understanding of Iran's nuclear program. But the operations that have been attributed to Israel, although they tell the Iranian regime that, yes, Israel has a very good understanding of what is happening inside Iran, the operations in themselves that have been attributed to Israel have so far not even brought Iran to the nuclear negotiation table. To make matters worse, the Iranians have pushed on. So I think there is merit in terms of what the Americans are saying, yes.
Right, so the question really is, how is it that the Iranian nuclear capabilities have increased after the sabotage? Is it because it gives the Iranians cover to rebuild those facilities to be more effective, or is it because the Iranians then basically say, you know what, our facilities are being sabotaged, we can go ahead and increase our uranium enrichment? Is it diplomatic? Because it seems that the Iranians, anyway, they didn't really care about the various clauses in the agreement and would break them if they could under cover. So how is this possible exactly?
Look, on the one hand, Iran, as the documents from the Mossad showed that they brought from Tehran, Iran had been hiding the plans to make a nuclear weapon. And you have these plans because you want to at least have the option of making it. And that in itself is illegal. That is correct. But on the other hand, to carry out, to continue the struggle against Iran for now, you have to understand that when there's an attack, when there's an action, there's a counteraction. The Iranian regime cannot fire missiles at Israel in retaliation for these attacks. The Iranian regime it can, but it could lead to war, and that's not what it wants to. The Iranian regime feels humiliated at home because of these attacks. The Iranian regime feels that these attributed attacks to Israel are a major blow, and if it leaves on such attacks unanswered, then that's going to make it look weak at home, and it's also going to encourage further such attacks by. But
what was keeping the Iranians in check before the attacks from improving their nuclear capabilities anyway?
Before, it was the JCPOA. The JCPOA was keeping them in check. Whether you agree with the JCPOA or not, what we know is that the agreement kept Iran under control, kept the Iranian, and even the documents by the Mossad showed that Iran had not broken the JCPOA.
But some of these attacks took place after the U.S. exited the deal already, though.
Correct. And Iran was taking counter actions against the U.S. leaving the deal. But it seems, judging by the results so far, that actions attributed to Israel have led to an increase in the acceleration of Iran moving away from the JCPOA. And this is not what we want. Look, you or I, we don't want to nuclear Iran. That's absolutely positive. And you and I, would view Iranian nuclear program as a danger. That's very true. But we cannot dismiss the option. We cannot dismiss the possibility that, of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. But we cannot dismiss the possibility that some of these operations attributed to Israel, taken during Netanyahu, had domestic political goals. Because Mr. Netanyahu, of course, he also doesn't want nuclear weapon Iran, nor does Meretz. But we cannot dismiss the possibility that these options were undertaken in Iran, attributed to Israel, in order to boost Mr. Netanyahu's domestic standing. Because look, nobody's trying to undermine Israeli power here. But again, we have to have a goal. Mr. Netanyahu was not blind to the fact that every time there was these attacks attributed to Israel, the acceleration.
Certainly, Mayo, there's political considerations here from both sides, from the Israeli side and from the Iranian side. They're having an effect here on the outcome. Thank you very much.
Latest news, Israel-Iran. The Times of Israel, headliner, world running out of time to deal with Iran. UK's Johnson tells Herzog. Dated November 23rd, 2021. President Isaac Herzog urged UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to take a hard line against Iran in talks aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear accord at a meeting between the two leaders in London Tuesday. Herzog said Israel needed its allies to firmly oppose Iran's nuclear ambitions. As the PS1 group of world powers prepare to restart negotiations in Vienna next week, aimed at reviving the multilateral nuclear accord they signed in 2015. The P5-1 compromises China, Russia, France, the US, and UK, plus Germany. Herzog went on to say, we are looking forward for our allies in the P5 to be as tough as possible because we do not believe that they, the Islamic Republic, are operating in a bona fide manner, and only if all options are on the table may things move in the right direction. Johnson warned that the world doesn't have much time on Iran, echoing concerns by leaders in Israel and the West over Tehran's rapidly mounting uranium stockpile amid moribund nuclear negotiations. Israel is opposed to the U.S. returning to the tattered nuclear accord, but has also sought to press for more safeguards and curbs on Iranian actions should an agreement take shape. Herzog earlier discussed with Iran and a group of 100 British lawmakers on Monday. He urged the group to make sure their government remains tough ahead of the upcoming Iran negotiations. Herzog also thanked Johnson for the UK's decision to proscribe the entire Hamas organization as a terror group. This is a very important message to terror organizations and global radicals trying to undermine the situation in the Middle East, Herzog said. The British Prime Minister said his government's recent listing of the entire Hamas organization as a terror group had been the right move and condemned the Hamas terror group in Jerusalem on Sunday that killed an Israeli man on his way to work. Johnson went on to say, I think it is the right decision. It was a difficult and controversial decision, but I think the right thing, and by the way, a decision that I think was almost immediately vindicated by the appalling incident that we saw in Israel. Terrible. Last week, London announced that it was designating the entirety of Hamas as a terror organization, outlawing support for the group. Herzog thanked the British lawmakers on Monday for the decision. Herzog, a former head of the Jewish Agency, also met Tuesday with leaders of Britain's Jews, including the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Jewish Leadership Council, and the Union of Jewish Students. We want to tell the British Jewish community that you are going to be a central pillar in this activity because you are an exemplary community, Herzog said. Earlier Monday, Herzog met with Prince Charles, the heir to the British throne, for a discussion centered on climate change, regional threats, and Holocaust education. Also on Monday, Herzog met with Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and took part in a tribute dinner for former British chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who died last year. Herzog highlighted concerns about discrimination in sports during an address in the audience in a suite at Chelsea Stadium. The president and his wife are set to return to Israel on Tuesday evening. Al Jazeera, headliner, Israel signals readiness to escalate Iran confrontation. Dated November 23rd, 2021. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has signaled a readiness to step up Israel's confrontation with Iran, reiterating on Tuesday his country would not be bound by any Iranian nuclear deal with world powers. Indirect negotiations will begin on November 29th on reviving the 2015 accord, which former U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from, deeming it insufficient to shut down projects with bomb-making potential, a view shared by the Israelis. Iran, which denies seeking nuclear arms, has since the United States breached the deal with expanded uranium enrichment. Bennett, who took power in June, described Iran in a speech as being the most advanced stage of its nuclear program. While his government has previously said it would be open to a new nuclear deal with tougher restrictions on Iran, Bennett reasserted that Israel's autonomy to take action against its foe. We face complicated times, Bennett said. It is possible that there will be disputes with the best of our friends. In any event, even if there is a return to the deal, Israel is, of course, not a party to the deal, and Israel is not obligated by the deal. Bennett voiced frustration with what he described as Israel's smaller-scale clashes with Iran's militia allies. The Iranians have encircled the state of Israel with missiles while they sit safely in Tehran, he said, to chase the terrorist du jour sent by the Iranian covert Quds force does not pay off anymore. We must go for the dispatcher. Stopping short of explicitly threatening war, Bennett said cyber technologies and what he deemed Israel's advantages as a democracy and international support could be brought to bear. Iran is much more vulnerable than is commonly thought, Bennett said. Israel has sharpened its rhetoric against Iranian combat drones on Tuesday, disclosing what is said were two bases used to carry out maritime attacks with the remote control planes and offering to cooperate with Arab partners on countermeasures. Gulf Arab countries share Israel's concern about such drones, seeing the hand of Tehran or its allies in aerial attacks on shipping on energy facilities in Saudi Arabia. Tehran has often denied such allegations. According to Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz in a televised security conference, today I revealed to you two central bases in the area of Chabar and Kahem Island in South Iran, from which operations in the maritime arena were launched, and where today, too, advanced Shahed attack drones are deployed. Separately, the chief of Israel's Air Force proposed working with Arab partners, such as the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, with which Israel formalized ties last year against the drone threat. General Anakan Norkin told the conference hosted by Reichman University, I think that this is a great opportunity to create contacts and to build a defense plan for all the countries that have a common interest in protecting themselves. We can help significantly against drones, whether in terms of intelligence, detention, or interception. That's the latest news. Now my thoughts. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, which is the United Nations nuclear watchdog, they have reported that Iran has boosted its stocks of enriched uranium, which the report transpires just days before the scheduled talks in Vienna to restore the 2015 nuclear deal. According to the agency, it said that it estimated Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium at 4,488 pounds, several times more than the cap agreed in the JCPOA. However, the enriched uranium, according to Iran, is for engineering purposes, not for nuclear enrichment. Whether we are to believe that or not, the most important aspect of this is that how are we going to decipher the report? Well, if you're the West, if you're Israel, if you're Saudi Arabia, this means they're enriching uranium and they want to go to war. If you're a Shia, if you're someone who's moderately libertarian or even slightly libertarian, you are against the aspect of war and hoping to think that this is nothing more than the country who is in turmoil within regarding the public sector and the government and its mullahs, trying to fix its infrastructure because there are harsh economic sanctions on the country from the United States. The Iranians want to get to the deal. They want to work with the United States in return to the JCPOA. Under the Raisi government, I feel that if the talks break down, that we will see a war within the next 12 to 14 months. Now, this depends on Biden. Is Biden at this stage of his life, an advanced stage, capable mentally and physically to take on a war of magnificent proportions? This is not Iraq. This is bigger. And it will affect the world over. We won't be just dealing with Iran. We'll be dealing with Syria, Lebanon, the Shia minority, who are a very voracious group of fighters. The Baathists in Iraq were already disseminated from the economic sanctions reported by the Clinton administration. And of course, the first Gulf War under H.W. Bush. The Iranians, yes, suffering under economic sanctions. However, they are a formidable army. And this war serves no purpose, not for the American people. None at all. And this is the reason why the United States is trying their best to use propaganda through the media to perpetrate the thoughts that Iran is the world's global threat and the in terms of exporting terrorism, which is anybody worth their salt or with even a slight knowledge of how in regards to radical fundamentalism or Middle East affairs knows that this is ridiculous. Hezbollah is not a terrorist threat to the United States. If that's the case, Saudi Arabia is the world's greatest exporter of terrorism, and they are. Through their Wahhabi ideology, which is un-Islamic, by the way, the majority of Sunnis would agree. The entirety of their belief created the groups that we see around the world, which are enacting on terrorism, such as Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, the Boko Haram in Africa, the Pakistan militants, the Gulf militants that we see, Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, the many other groups that are in the Southeast Asia. And this is hypocrisy. And of course, this is outright, we're on the verge of war with a country that we should be allied with. But because we are led by sociopathic and greedy oligarchs, people who have a vested interest in profit, and even worse, authoritarian and totalitarian power, that they're willing to not only subjugate the United States, but to the Arab world in general. The United States also is not ready for something like this. They are going through their own turmoil with the pandemic, or what's left of it, which was perpetrated by the government and other governments as well. The continued economic hardships afforded to the American people, in which they can't afford even the basic necessities, and going through the realities of a harsh life, Homelessness is on the rise. The job sector is suffering. No matter what the left is pushing regarding job growth, that means nothing in terms of job growth. Whose jobs are growing? I will tell you right now that it's not the middle class or lower class sectors. That percentage, that working class is never going to return, and that's the pandemic. I live in New York. I'm telling you from my experience, and I'm sure this is relatable to many others who are listening, that the small town shops, the restaurants, the bookstores, the mom and pop stores, they have all closed. The jobs that have grown are the corporate stores, Walmart, Target, Kmart, the big corporate stores that got the big money from the pandemic in regards to government loans and their stimulus package. You got a pittance, $1,600, a pittance, and they ask you to worship them for what they give to you. You deserve $5,000, not $1,600. Peanuts. In fact, $1,600 doesn't even pay the rent here in New York. So when I talk about the ramifications of this conflict, what I'm saying is it will hurt in many different venues, economically, physically, spiritually, mentally, not just here, but abroad. And they're doing it in our name. And we need to speak up on it. Because if we allow foreign governments like Israel, like Saudi Arabia, to dictate American foreign policy, then we don't have a country to begin with. And it's certainly not a country for the people, by the people.